Speaking of Port of Asab, after Ethiopia-Eritrea rapprochement, the signing of agreements and the announcement on Asab is currently underway. The King Ethiopia is roaring back, possibly take over of Asab port and vast Afar territory, land and coastal properties without any consultation with the Afar nation or listening to the grievances of Afar, a nation in Eritrea. We have all heard and seen of Worki's last visit to Addis Ababa last year, and the declaration on Asab by Dr. Abiy and how he would like to split the spoils of Asab, the port of Asab, with his friend Isaias with the Afom. Ethiopia cannot ignore the fact that these are Afar territories and these lands was taken illegally by murderous means and crimes against humanity, by forcible evictions and by displacement of indigenous Afar from their traditional territories and soil. We have written to Dr. Abiy not to ignore Afar grievances regarding the ethnic cleansing, regarding the forcible displacement of Afar from Asab and the confiscation of the sea coast. Ethiopia cannot afford to ignore the findings by the United Nations Commission of Inquiry on Human Rights in Eritrea, who investigated and confirmed the atrocities against the Afar in Eritrea. We have told Prime Minister Dr. Abiy ignoring the United Nations finding will lead Ethiopia of being complicit in crimes against humanity against the Afar in Eritrea. So far we have not received any answers from Ethiopia. Ethiopia has the responsibility to uphold the international law on the rights of indigenous people. ክቡር ጠቅላይ ሚኒስትር ዶክተር አቢይ አሰብን በሚመለከት በሚሌኒየም አዳራሽ ለመላው ኢትዮጵያውያንና ኤርትራውያን ያደረጉት ንግግር ተገቢ አይደለም. Your declaration on Asab means Ethiopia has not learned its lesson regarding Afar rights in Asab. Let me remind you, sir, of the 1954 Afar labor strike in Asab. This was a time when Eritreans were apprehensive about Ethiopia's long hands reaching into Eritrean affairs. In 1994, the Afar nation of Asab opposed Ethiopia's interference and the imposing of Ethiopian labor laws and the imposing of Ethiopia's workforce to work in the port of Asab. The peaceful protest turned violent when Ethiopian military forces, the Tor Sarawit, opened fire against the Afar protests, killing 3 Afar protesters and wounding 3 others. We have names of those martyrs in Afar martyrs in Asab. Even many Eritreans probably not aware of these facts. ክቡር ጠቅላይ ሚኒስትር Prime Minister Dr. Abiy, አንደኛ አሰብ የአፋር ህዝብ ልዑላዊ ታሪካዊ እና ህጋዊ መብት ነው። ሁለተኛ በዳንካሊያ ውስጥ ባለፉት 28 ዓመታት በአፋር ህዝብ ላይ የደረሰው በደል crimes against humanity የዘር ማጥፋት ወንጀል ተፈጽሟል። በኢንተርናሽናል human rights ዘንዳ ክሱ ሁሉ ቀርቧል። መላው የዩናይትድ ኔሽንስ member states including Ethiopia የኤሪትሪያን መንግስት ያወገዙበት ጊዜ ነበር። ሶስተኛ በአሰብና በዳንካሊያ ውስጥ ያሉት የተለያዩ የአፋር ንብረቶች የሚመለከት የኢኮኖሚክ ግንኙነት አፋርን የሚያካትት መሆን አለበት። ክቡር ጠቅላይ ሚኒስትር አፋር ሰንተርድ ያልሆነ አፋር መብት ያልተጠበቀ የኤሪትሪያ ግንኙነት ሰላምና እድገት ሊያመጣ አይችልም። Dear Prime Minister Dr. Abiy, as millions across the region enthusiastically welcomed you as a new leader, the Afar nation were also encouraged by your reforms initiatives in Ethiopia and supported your peaceful initiative for coexistence, socio-economic integrations and the hope for economic growth between Ethiopia and Eritrea. But those initiatives and economic engagement must respect the rights of Afar nation and recognize the Afar territorial integrity and land ownership of Afar nation in Eritrea. We are not saying Ethiopia should pay for Eritrea's crimes, but Ethiopia should not embroil itself in the ongoing crimes against humanity by utilizing the Afar territory and by properties which are the subject of crimes against humanity and currently challenged in the international criminal systems. Dear Prime Minister Abiy, as Ethiopia's new leader, you have a great opportunity to correct Ethiopia's historic injustices when it comes to Eritrea. The Afar people reject internal colonization of their traditional territories and resources and the use of discriminatory policy to exploit the natural resources of the Afar nation. The Afar are not against peace building and nation building. The Afar are not about redrawing the colonial borders. We simply are saying the nation building agenda of Ethiopia and Eritrea cannot be built on the backdrops of crimes against humanity and at the expense of indigenous Afar people. The Afar people have equal rights to safety, security, economic development, needs to fight against Afar poverty and fight against historic marginalization in this region. The Afar nation cannot be denied the rights to internal self-determination, to self-determine their political future, their economic freedoms, and the rights to safety and security in the region. My dear colleagues and compatriots in diaspora, our roadmap for democratic transition in Eritrea should start now. As opposition group representing the Afar nation in Eritrea, we believe there has to be an urgent inclusive national discourse on Eritrea's future constitution. And this discussion on democratic transition should not wait until the fall of the dictatorship in Eritrea. The discourse surrounding the implementation of the 1997 constitution, the narrative of the state building, democratic reform, national sovereignty would be incomplete unless it addressed the issues of ethnicity in Eritrea, unless it addresses historic Afar grievances, unless it addresses land issues, unless addresses the issues of self-governance, unless it addresses the historic marginalization and the injustices that has taken place in the past 28 years in Eritrea. And if you think the Afar issue or Dankalia issue is a subnational issue in Eritrean discourse today, think again. Even though Dankalia is where the question of self-determination and liberation struggle started for Eritrea, many Eritreans are not aware of the importance of this region. It is true the Afar nation have always been politically, culturally, economically, even geographically at the margin of things, away from the influence of Addis Ababa or Asmara. But Dankalia issue is the most pressing and sensitive issue in Eritrea today. It is the national issue. Look at what is happening in Dankalia in terms of geopolitics. Like I mentioned, the presence of the Arab Gulf nations, the conflict in Yemen, and the presence of the Western powers, apprehensive about the influence of Iran in the region, the involvement of multinational corporations competing for Dankalia's national resources, the multi-billion-dollar investments projects involving natural gas, giant potash deposits in Kululi, Dankalia, now trading on London Stock Exchange. The potash said to be one of the best in the world. Not to mention the newly cemented Ethiopia-Eritrea relationship and the secrecy surrounding the use of coastal waters for Ethiopia's navy use, and the agreement to use the port of Asab and Mosawa. Very little details what the agreement is all about. The possibility of the transfer of large number of Ethiopian workforce to work in the port of Asab, possibly Eritreans becoming a minority in their homeland. The whole thing is the most sensitive and concerning sovereignty issue for Eritreans. Aside from the significance of our region geopolitically and economically, I like to point out to the people factor. Most often we forget what is the sacrifice or the status of Afar nation historically in this part of the world, and even during the liberation struggle. At the turning point of the 18th century, the shores of Afar territories were at the center of European colonization. This was a time when Europeans were scrambling to get their hands on the wealth of African nations. During this time, the Afar indigenous nation were organized and recognized internationally. They had sultanates with authorities. They had functioning indigenous customary laws to control over their vast territories, a wealth and a resource distribution system. They had freedom of mobility. If there was conflict with neighboring nations, it was resolved peacefully, most of the time using the indigenous laws. One of those conflicts took place in our region was most notably a conflict that took place between Mussolini forces and the Afar sultanates of Grifo, sultanates of Biru. The Afar Sultan Yasin Haisama of Grifo in Dankalia fought against Italian colonialism, defending his territories and people from being colonized. The conflict, a colonial conflict, lasted over 35 years. Countless Afar lives were lost, along with many Italian soldiers. The Sultan Yasin Haisama was in fact captured and killed in fighting along countless Afar people. His brother Muhammad Haisama and his father Sultan Haisama also died fighting against the both internal and external attempt to colonize Dankalia, both by Italians and the Tigrayan rules at the time. Similarly, another Sultan, Sultan Laoita Humad, was captured after refusing to be colonized by the French colonialists in Djibouti. He later died in captivity in Madagascar in 1931. Another Afar Sultan from the dynasty of Afar Sultanates in the region also died in prison in Addis Ababa in 1944. After the independence of Eritrea, yet another Sultan was forced out of Eritrea from the descendants of the Sultan of Grifo, Sultan Muhammad Ahaw. Late Sultan Muhammad Ahaw died in exile in Yemen. These Afar sultans commanded respect of their people. They exerted authorities throughout the Afar territories beyond the colonial borders of today. I can't think of a single nation that has sacrificed so many of its leaders and kings fighting against the European colonialism in Africa. This reminds me a song about a redemption song by Bob Marley that says, "How long they shall kill our prophets while we stand and look." Today the Afar history and bravery is not even being taught in the history books of Eritrea. Today the Afar reality is in sharp contrast of its once glorious past. The Afar sacrifice was also significant during the liberation struggle for independence through 1950s to 1977. People like Muhammad Omar Akito, the pioneers of Eritrean self-determination struggle, Ahmed Hilal, Ali Sayyid, Ga'as Musa, Idris Gumhed, Ahmed Ahaw, Dini Ismail. These are just a few of our thinkers and military commanders that paid the ultimate sacrifice for the independence of Eritrea. They have never envisioned one day their children would be the subject of Afar marginalization and ethnic persecution in Eritrea. Dear friends and compatriots, going forward as Eritreans, we need to press a reset button on the future of our democratic union in Eritrea. The 1997 constitution is a non-starter for the Afar people. We need a fundamental change, not a cosmetic change in Eritrea. Of course, there is no off-the-shelf constitutional solution for Eritrea. We need to sit down and, as Eritreans, as people, as political opposition groups, as civil society groups, constitutional experts, religious leaders, indigenous ethnic groups, and minority groups, to reconcile our differences, assert our rights, in guaranteeing those rights in a constitution that reflects our diversity, reflects our ethnic, multi-ethnic, multi-religious, multi-regional, multicultural, multilingual diversity of Eritrea. Our national discourse about nation building should include reconciliation, restorative justice for those who dealt with injustices, ethnic persecution, marginalization, how to deal with nationalities' rights to internal self-determination, people's right to control over their land and resources, the economic well-being, protection for religious freedoms, the right to protect and develop our unique identity, languages, cultures. Guaranteeing those rights in a constitution is the best interest for everyone, and it is a crucial solution for democratic transition, for our unity and nation building agenda today. As one of those indigenous nationalities who have been dealt with historic marginalization and injustice in Eritrea, we, the Afar, believe a multicultural, multi-regional, federal constitutional model can address all of these differences, groups and grievances of different groups, historic cultural identities, the ethnic composition, and fair and equal representations of our people. Some people raise the argument that Eritrea is a melting pot of cultures and ethnicities. It will be difficult to accommodate on those grounds. Yes, there are areas and regions in Eritrea that are mixed. There are areas and regions that are exclusively of one ethnic group. For example, Dankalia, even with Eritrean regime's systematic attack on our identity and attempt to change the demographic of our population, Dankalia is still exclusively ethnic Afar homeland. The majority of Afar hinterland is still not tempered with. There are regions in the highlands probably still have the old provincial structure, Sarai, Akal, Guzai, Hamasein, exclusively that of the Tigrinya ethnicity. For example, with that composition, there could be the question of our Jaberti brothers could be addressed as a distinct society. Their grievances can be addressed within those regional or provincial model. The Western Eritrea, the lowland and the middle lowland, part of Sahel region of Eritrea could be a strong bloc or a combination of regional federal states with its historic intermarriages and of mixed population, mixed religion and ethnicities. Within this region, the question of our brothers and sisters nationalities like the Kunama, Saho, Tigray, Nara, Bilain, Bani Amr could be addressed in their own self-governance and regional state solution can be accommodated. Again, there is no off-the-shelf constitutional solutions or models we can simply apply to our nationalities' demographics. We need to tailor-make those solutions available to accommodate for each of our nationalities, ethnicities, regions, and to address cultural grievances. We really believe the system of Eritrean Federation based on those historic backgrounds will lead us into a more perfect Eritrean Union. I know many of us just can't wait until this tyrannical regime goes belly up, but we simply cannot afford to wait until the last minute. We have said crimes against humanity, cultural genocides, gross human rights violations have taken place in Eritrea. The absence of the rights of the victims, marginalized groups, equality of all nationality simply cannot wait. In closing, as Eritreans, we need to rethink our nation-building agenda. Unless we protect our collective rights, we will continue to be divided as a democratic opposition groups. With pressure from international community, we understand Eritrean regime is currently working behind closed doors on its own version of a new constitution for Eritrea. We have no doubt this constitution will resemble the 1997 constitution, highly centralized, giving more power to the center, protecting the status quo, subduing Eritrea's ethnic identity, probably something cut out of the EPLF political manifesto of the 1971. We must collectively reject constitutional making process that marginalize a segment of our population, a constitution that lacks proper consultation with Eritrea's multicultural, multi-ethnic, multi-religious communities. Recovering from the years of crimes against humanity will require a process of healing for the nation. As Eritreans, we need to come to terms with what has taken place in Eritrea. Eritrea needs a truth and reconciliation process, something like what South Africa went through after the end of the apartheid rule. The Afar nation have endured enough injustice. First at the hands of European colonization in the late 1880s, then the encroachment of Ethiopian kings on Afar territories, and now the ethnic cleansing policies by the most repressive Eritrean regime in Eritrea. As far as the Afar are concerned, I don't think there is any more resilient and self-conscious people on the face of planet than the Afar nation. This is not even considering the harsh and the inhospitable environment they survive on, a volcanic landscape, severe drought, the dying out of once sustainable nomadic pastoralist lifestyle because of climate change in the region. You will find among the Afar a remarkable story and will to survive. I will urge our Eritrean political opposition groups, activist groups, NGOs, Eritrean scholars to work on a process of healing, bridging the gaps between various groups and their grievances. We must work closely on asserting the rights of all of our Eritrean diverse nations and nationality to make sure no one is left behind. If we fail to prepare ourselves for post-dictatorship Eritrea and defend the rights of all of our people, there is going to be irreversible damage to our Eritrea's sovereignty and the unity of our social fabric. Finally, to my Tigrinya brothers or any other sister nationalities, my intention is not to aggravate our relationship or about wedge politics or offend your beautiful culture. My intention is to bring to your attention the grievances and the issues of concern of the Afar people that you may not be aware of otherwise, to discuss and reconcile the differences and ultimately come up with solutions. We know this tyrannical regime in Eritrea did not spare you from brutality because you are a Tigrinya. You have equally suffered under this brutal tyrant. Many of your children vanished in Mediterranean Sea. I and my fellow Afar share your pain and value your culture and identity. We want to work with you. I know there are concerns in the highlands about the overpopulation or the scarcity of natural resources. We want to assure you the Afar certainly understand those concerns and will work in collaborative solution for Eritrea in terms of resource distribution, a fair and equitable economic development agenda for the well-being of all segments of Eritrean population. Dear compatriots, friends and colleagues, together we must claim back our dignity, the future ownership of our political, social, economic freedoms and aspirations for a just and prosperous Eritrea. Let us all join hands in solidarity to defeat the current system and work hand in hand to draft a system that we can all be proud of, to decolonize our land and our people, to restore our dignity from the 28 years of humiliation and oppression. I say in the Afar version of the Akil, Nedi'tah, Samad Baisi Solai. Nankalia cannot be sold. Thank you for your support. Thanks for listening. I look forward in working with you to achieve all of our goals and aspirations for the new Eritrea. Yihlo biso.